Hey, welcome back. So the last video that I did was on this instrument. This is a mid-90s made in Japan Fender BassVI, and that video got a lot more views than I ever thought that it would. So I thought, why not do sort of a follow-on to that video? One of the things I want to talk about today is actually based on one of the questions that I got in the comment section, which was sort of along the lines of, do I feel like the BassVI could be used in place of a four-string bass, like a P bass or a jazz bass? And I thought this was an interesting question because, as I mentioned in the last video, I have always approached this instrument more from the perspective of a guitar player. I'm not really a bass player, but I play at bass, but I wouldn't call myself a bass player. So I have always tended to approach this in terms of more like a guitar than a bass. And when I'm using it for songwriting, I almost always have a bass, playing the bass line, and I'm using this for more melodic fills and to add something extra to the track, because this, as I mentioned last time, it kind of sits in the sonic area, kind of in between a bass and a guitar. But I thought it would be interesting to do a video to kind of explore that in a little bit more detail, and frankly challenge some of my own assumptions about the instrument. So at first glance, could this be used in place of a bass? Yes, of course. It has all the same, you can play all the same notes on this as you could on a four-string bass, plus you've got the two, the high B string and the high E. So in that regard, yes, of course. But this is, fundamentally, it's a very different instrument. So that's what I want to talk about today in a little bit more detail. So in terms of the physical differences between these instruments, the first thing that I would call out is the scale length. The scale length of the BassVI is 30 inches from the nut to the bridge breakover, whereas on a P bass it is 34 inches, and that's a pretty big difference. Generally speaking, a smaller string gauge is going to have lower string tension, and it's going to be easier to fret, and it's just going to feel more elastic, right? That is especially true, I think, on, so for example, if you were to compare the differences on, a shorter to a longer scale length on a guitar, the difference is minor. I mean, like between a Strat and a Les Paul, for example. But the difference here between 30 and 34 inches, that's a pretty large gap. And so you'll find that on the BassVI there's a lot lower string tension, so it's very sort of elastic and spongy in that regard. And so I find that you have to play this with a fairly light touch. So for example, if you were really trying to dig in on a bass line, whether it was a finger style or a picked style, you can play a lot harder on a P bass or a jazz bass than you can on this. You're going to get a lot of sort of flubbing out and fretting out. Just going to get a lot of rattle if you really try to dig in too much. You see what I mean? So that's scale length. Moving on from that, I want to focus on the frets. The frets on this instrument are closer to a guitar fret, right? They're not especially tall, they're not especially wide. See if I can get a good sort of camera angle there, versus what you would see on a P bass. Significantly beefier frets, and they just allow you to dig in a lot more and press a lot harder, which of course you actually need to do with that higher string tension. But you can play a lot harder with getting a lot of that fret rattle. Now, obviously I could raise the string height on the BassVI and compensate a little bit for some of that rattle, but the point I'm trying to make is that these are different instruments, and you have to play them slightly differently. Another point that I'll bring up is the neck profile. The P bass has a wider neck, and it has a flatter profile on the back, particularly at the upper register, right? This is fairly flat in the back. I don't know if all P basses are this way, but mine certainly is. Whereas the Bass 6 has a much more rounded, has a much more rounded neck profile, and the profile doesn't really change as you get into the upper register. It's fairly consistent all the way up to the neck heel. And so in that regards, it in the hand, it feels much more like a guitar than a bass to me. And then finally, there's the bridge, right? And there's no getting around it. This is a guitar bridge, right? This is the bridge from the Jaguar and the Jazzmaster, and you have the string breakover after the bridge, and so when you play, you get all sorts of harmonic overtones that come from having those. Typically, you wouldn't see that on a regular P bass or a jazz bass style bridge, where the string just sort of terminates here at the back of the bridge. There's a very, very limited string extension past the breakover point there, so you just don't get quite those same harmonic overtones. So all this is to say, if you're looking to lay down just a straight bass track, I think that you'll find the Bass 6 a little bit challenging in that regard. Like, you'll have to compensate regarding how you play it. You'll have to compensate in the EQ and in various other things if you really wanted to try to get the same sound as a P bass and use it as a replacement. It could be done, but be prepared to do a little bit of work. That being said, I think the right approach would be to say, I'm not looking to use this necessarily as a complete sonic replacement, but I would be looking to use the Bass 6 as its own thing, even if I didn't have a bass in the track. Okay, so let's hear a little bit of kind of a side-by-side comparison to these instruments on the same signal chain and the same piece of music. So I'll start with a piece using the pick, and this is the bass line from Fascination Street from The Cure. Okay, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and here we go on the P bass. Okay, so now let's see what it sounds like with a finger-picked piece. So I'll be doing the bass line from Pink Floyd's song Money. And here it is on the P bass. So you may be thinking, okay, well that's one pickup configuration on the Bass 6 versus the P bass. Could it get more punchier or tighter in other pickup configurations? And the answer, I'm afraid, is no. I mean, not really. So, for example, here's a configuration with using both the neck and the bridge. You'll get a little bit more low end. Or you can try just using the neck by itself and see how that sounds. Maybe it's a little closer, but not quite. And I think for the most part, it's down to the shorter scale length. It just gives the overall instrument just a spongier feel, and you can just get a lot more fret rattle. It doesn't have that same low end punch. That being said, could you use this as a replacement? You certainly could. You would just have to play it in a slightly different way and adjust your EQ and your compression. But there's just that classic, P bass sound or the jazz bass sound. not going to quite get that from this instrument. That being said, if any of you out there are playing in a band or in a musical project where this is your only, you know, low frequency instrument, let me know about it in the comment section. I'd be really eager to hear what you know, how you're using it and what that sounds like. I kind of have this mental, you know, map in my mind of what a band would sound like with like drums, keyboard, and a bass 6 as their 3 harmonic instruments, and then maybe a singer on top of that. I think that would be a really cool sound if you did that the right way. Anyways, let me know what you think. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.